Hey everyone, Chris here. So I have some notes down here, so if I'm looking down, that's why. And if you watched my last video, you know a lot of spells have been rebalanced in the 2024 Player's Handbook, and that video covered some of the spells I had flagged as needing rebalancing. There are far more that have seen positive changes, but there are too many for me to cover in videos. There's almost 400 spells in the Player's Handbook, and a lot of them have been revised. Like, here's True Polymorph. Now gives you temporary hit points, and when they're gone, the spell ends. So there's no turning anyone into adult ghoul dragons permanently anymore. I think that's a good change. That said, some spells I thought would be revised were not revised, and some spells that I didn't think needed a buff or nerf got one. And in a couple cases, there's some spells that got buffed where I'm really scratching my head. So today's video is where I'm going to highlight those kinds of spells. So this is my third video covering the new Player's Handbook since the embargo was lifted. And all the videos that I've done up to now are all available on my Patreon right now. And if you are a wizard level patron or higher, there are dedicated channels to discuss all of these videos. So you, with other viewers, can discuss the contents and speculate and do all the stuff you like to do. And I just want to say that if you do want to take part in that, there is a link to my Patreon down in the video description. This is my career, and it is made possible by the patrons of this channel. If you'd be willing to support this content, support through Patreon is my main source of income, and it is truly appreciated. Speaking of which, time to give out a call out to my highest level patrons, my Thaumaturge level patrons. So thank you to Airhead, Alex R, Vo, Bloody 9, Atherzone, Brian, CJ, Chris C, Coral, Dank Train, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Eden the DM, Aaron, Eric Wasserman, Evan Getting, FBK05, Gishlife, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jiriru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, Mark D, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, Mike Anoid, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Thunderlock, Tim Gerbafic, and William Whittles. Okay, now that I'm done my shameless self-promotion, let's get to the spells. Now, I do recognize that everything I'm going to say here is all based on my opinions, which aren't shared by everyone, and I am not so arrogant as to think my opinions as to what revisions were needed or not needed is necessarily the right opinion, or better than your opinion. But this is a channel where I share my opinions, and in my opinion, these spells just weren't quite what I was expecting. So up on your screen right now is the old aid, and we saw this spell in the playtest, and it gave temporary hit points instead of increasing your current and maximum hit points by 5. This spell, I think, was intended to be like a buff, but it ends up being more like a healing spell, except with multiple targets because it increases your current hit points, including if your current hit points are at 0. I didn't think they were going to backtrack on the playtest for this one, but they did. The mechanics of aid are now identical to 2014. The only difference is they added it to a bunch of spell lists, so bards, druids, and ranger spell lists now also include aid. This would have really peed me off if they hadn't buffed all the classic healing spells, but they did, so I don't think this is a big deal, but being that we saw this in the playtest, I just had figured it was a spell that I should probably cover in this video to let you know that the playtest version didn't go through and they went right back to the 2014 version. Okay, so Chromatic Orb. This one is a weird case because this spell was on the weak side and they did buff it, which is good. It works the same as it did unless you roll doubles on 2 of the damage dice. If you do, then it bounces to a different target within 30 feet of the first one. You make another attack roll, and then maybe you hit 2 targets with the same spell. It's kind of like the old Chromatic Orb and Chaos Bolt had a baby, and here it is. So why did I put it on this video and not my previous video? Because of what they didn't change. They didn't change the component cost. So once you have your 50 gold piece diamond, you're good to go. But this is a first level spell, and if I am a wizard or a sorcerer of first level, I do not have 50 gold to spend on a component. So there's this weird cost of admission going on with this spell that keeps it out of the hands of first level characters, and I just thought for sure they were going to get rid of it, or at least bring down the cost so a starting character could actually access this spell. And they didn't. I'm not sure why they left that in. Okay, so this will be quick. Crown of Madness, this is a bad spell, and I had flagged it. It was on my list of spells that I really thought would get some love. No love. Not much to say here other than the mechanics remain identical to 2014. Enhanceability. Okay, so this is an okay spell, and I really didn't think they were going to do much to change it. They did change it, and I don't love it. So here is the new version, and I get that they were looking to condense the wording of spells, but what they did is they removed all the little flavorful add-ons. Like in the old version, if you did dexterity, then you didn't take damage from falling. And that's been removed. Now it is just advantage on ability checks with the chosen ability. I just think they took out some flavor that was kind of fun. So, not a fan of that. Alright, Find Familiar. So, cool your engines. I was not looking for big nerfs to Find Familiar, despite it arguably being the most powerful first level spell in the game. Can I stop saying arguably? I think so. The most powerful first level spell in the game. But this spell has some clunky mechanics that I thought were a safe bet to be fixed. Like, you roll initiative for it in combat. It's just not nearly as smooth as it goes right after you, like the new summoning spells do or the new pet rules do. It seemed like an obvious fix to me. And there's weird language with it having to, reappear from its pocket dimension anywhere within 30 feet of you without needing to see it or needing a clear path to the target. That created some odd interactions. And they didn't change either of those things. There were things that were changed, but it's mostly the same. So you can pick any challenge rating 0 beast now for your familiar. And get this, the telepathic communication where the familiar shared what it saw and heard with you for a round, and you had to spend your action on your turn to maintain that, they've changed that to a bonus action. So yeah, they've actually boosted Find Familiar. Find Familiar getting buffed was not on my bingo card, but it was, and it's just really odd, especially the initiative thing. I'm really disappointed that they didn't change that, but anyway, they didn't. Alright, time for Nerd Rage. Find Traps has always been a pet peeve of mine because, as I said in my previous video, I figure spells should do what their name implies. It says specifically that you don't learn the location of the traps. Why would you put that statement in a spell called Find Traps? I mean, call it Detect Traps or something. So here is the new version, and it's not new. It's the same, and it says this spell reveals that a trap is present, but not its location. Now, in fairness, I wasn't going to take Find Traps either way. It's just not a spell that I would normally take on my character. It's just a pet peeve that they didn't take care of, and it's just kind of annoying to me. So, here's my thumbnail. Find Traps, not fixed. Alright, up on your screen is the old version of Heat Metal. Now, Heat Metal, I think, is an okay spell. I mean, it's really powerful if you have the right opponent. That's the opponent who's wearing metal armor, because then you cast Heat Metal on their armor, and there's nothing they can do, right? I have problems with the mechanics of Heat Metal, though. Specifically, it calls for a saving throw, but that saving throw really doesn't do anything. And if they're wearing armor, it really does nothing. The saving throw is entirely pointless. It's just a waste of time, yet the spell still calls for it. So I really thought that the mechanics would be addressed. And here is the new version of Heat Metal, and I'll save you some time. It's the same. They didn't change anything for Heat Metal. So here's Inflict Wounds, and I have regged on the spell a number of times because there's a lot of ranged attack roll spells that do very similar damage to this, so why would I want to wade into melee to make one attack that does nothing if you miss? And I have to say, this is a spell that I didn't think they would nerf, and they nerfed it. Here's the new version. It now does 2d10 necrotic damage, so it actually does less damage than the ranged attacks. I don't get it. What an odd spell to nerf. If they kept it the same, I wouldn't have even featured it in this video because it wasn't something I was overly concerned about, but the nerf is really surprising. So Melf's Acid Arrow is a bad spell. I thought likely they would make it better. Nope, they did not make it better. It in fact works the same as it did in 2014, and this one is surprising because it is so bad compared to other, damaging spells that it just seemed like, they're boosting other damaging spells except for Inflict Wounds, but, a lot of spells had damage buffs, and Melf's Acid Arrow, nothing. So it's even worse compared to those spells than it was before. So here is the old Mirror Image spell. And this is not a spell I considered needed buffing or nerfing, but there are some clunky mechanics on it. You have to roll the d20, and depending on how many images you have, the number is different that you need to roll for it to hit an image. And then if it targets an image, then it has a much reduced armor class, making it easy to hit, which does make the images pretty easy to get rid of. So it had some significant revision, and kind of surprising revision. So this is the new version, still in action, still lasts a minute. 3 illusory duplicates of yourself appear in your space. Until the spell ends, the duplicates move with you and mimic your actions, shifting positions so it's impossible to track which image is real. Okay. Each time a creature hits you with an attack roll during the spell's duration, roll a d6 now, so not a d20, for each of your remaining duplicates. So if you have like 3 duplicates, you're rolling 3d6. If any of the d6s roll 3 or higher, one of the duplicates is hit instead of you. And so I think that's going to give a better chance of a duplicate being hit than before. And the duplicate is destroyed if it's hit. The duplicates otherwise ignore all other damage and effects. The spell ends when all 3 duplicates are destroyed. A creature is unaffected by the spell if it has the blinded condition, blind sight, or true sight. Did you notice the big change there? Because this spell got one huge buff to it that I wasn't expecting. Each time a creature hits you with an attack roll during the spell's duration. So the old version, if they attacked you, you rolled to see if they targeted an image instead. Not anymore. Now they have to attack you and hit you, meaning all your images are protected by your armor class. That is a huge buff to Mirror Image that just got a whole lot better, and that is kind of a surprise to me. So I've made no secret that I'm not a huge fan of Otto's Irresistible Dance. I get that you do the first round, as long as they're not immune to the charm condition, they don't get a saving throw. And then they have to actually use an action to get a save. So I get that. My issue with Otto's Irresistible Dance is it's not overly debilitating, considering its level and its single target. So let's take a look at the new version and see what they did with it. So here's the new version. Top stuff is all the same. So let me read the text and see if you can figure out why this spell got nerfed. 1 creature you can see within range must make a wisdom saving throw. On a successful save, the target dances comically until the end of its next turn, during which it must spend all of its movement to dance in place. On a failed save, the target has the charm condition for the duration. Well charmed, the target dances comically, must use all of its movement to dance in place, and has disadvantage on dexterity saving throws and attack rolls, and other creatures have advantage on attack rolls against it. On each of its turns, the target can take an action to collect itself and repeat the save, ending the spell on itself on a success. The difference between this and the old version is, with the old version, if you cast it at them, they were going to have to at least expend 1 action to get rid of it, because they have to use an action to make the saving throw. What they've done now is they've made it so that you're going to make a saving throw as soon as it's cast at you, not using an action, and if you make it, you're never going to have to use an action to get rid of this spell. Now, technically, there is a small buff here as well. If you target a creature, they make their wisdom saving throw, that first round, they're not charmed. So if they are immune to the charm condition, the first round, you still get that. Though I don't have any clue why you would want to expend a 6th level spell on a 1 round duration effect like this. But nevertheless, there is a small buff mixed in there. But overall, I'd say this spell has been nerfed, which is dumbfounding to me. But anyway, Otto's Irresistible Dance is worse than it was in 2014. Alright, so here is Planar Binding, and I just should say up front, I wasn't looking for Planar Binding to be nerfed. I wasn't looking for Planar Binding to be buffed. There was one piece of wording in Planar Binding that still causes confusion to this day that I felt really needed to be clarified. So let me highlight it. If the creature was summoned or created by another spell, that spell's duration is extended to match the duration of this spell. Here's my problem with that wording. So let's say you have a spell with 1 hour concentration. That's very, very, very common. All right, so you cast Planar Binding, and then the Planar Binding duration is 24 hours. Does the 1 hour concentration spell change to 24 hours with concentration or 24 hours without concentration? And there is an argument to be made for both sides, because I've talked to people who are certain that it's one way or the other, but I think they're both missing something, because this doesn't answer that question. Concentration, yes, it is part of duration, but this doesn't say that we are replacing the duration. We say we're extending the duration to match the duration of this spell. But you can't extend 1 hour concentration to 24 hours no concentration, because that's not just extending. It creates a situation where there is no clear answer to that question. And I thought for sure that would be fixed. It is not. The wording is identical. If the creature was summoned or created by another spell, that spell's duration is extended to match the duration of this spell. It's the same, and no other changes to this spell. It's the same spell it's always been, and I really thought that was just a slam dunk for something they would clarify, especially because clarification of rules in this book is, for the most part, like 99% of the time, fantastic. So much more clear than the 2014 version. This is just that odd situation where there was something that was just kind of obviously needing clarified, and they didn't clarify it. All they had to do is change the word extended to replaced. Done. Right? But they didn't do it. So yeah, still cloudy as to what happens when you have a concentration spell and you use Planar Binding. So here's Plant Growth, and Plant Growth is a great spell, but to be honest, I wasn't looking for a nerf for Plant Growth. I don't think it's broken or anything. And I definitely was looking for a buff to Plant Growth. It's plenty good already. It doesn't need fixed. My issue with Plant Growth is the wording. It says that, if you create the overgrown terrain, it requires 4 feet of movement for every 1 foot you actually move, which is fine. That's clear. The problem is they don't define it as difficult terrain, which means if you have difficult terrain and Plant Growth, they stack. And that's a lot, right? And they didn't change it. So Plant Growth is the same. And so I went and checked the rules glossary to see if the wording for difficult terrain had changed so that these didn't stack. No, it hasn't changed. It requires 1 extra foot of movement to move through difficult terrain. So they continue to stack. And it's kind of just weird to me. The idea of Plant Growth, I think, is that you are making the terrain difficult. Really, really difficult. Worse than regular difficult terrain. But if I already have slight Plant Growth causing difficult terrain, and I do Plant Growth, then why on earth are they stacking? I don't get it. But anyway, it is the same as it always was. Alright, here's Enfeeblement. This is a bad spell. I thought they might buff it. They didn't really buff it. But the thing that really bothers me about Enfeeblement, and this spell would not be on this list if they had fixed this part, is that it says that the creature that is affected by Enfeeblement has disadvantage on its strength-based attacks. Issue is that if you look at a stat block, it doesn't tell you whether the creature is using strength or dexterity for their attacks. Now, you can usually figure it out. As long as their strength and dexterity modifiers are different, you can do the math and you can figure it out. But it's a pain in the neck that you shouldn't have to do. And if their strength and dexterity modifiers are the same, then you don't know which modifier they're using. So I thought they would fix that, and they did not. Here's the new Enfeeblement. Now, they have changed it. because the old version required it to hit roll. The new version requires a Constitution saving throw. It's probably worse, I would say. And on a successful save, the target has disadvantage on the next attack it makes until the start of your next turn. So you get some effect even if they make their save, so that's a little bit better. Then it says, on a failed save, the target has disadvantage on strength-based d20 tests for the duration. So this actually creates a really weird situation, because let's say a creature makes dexterity-based attacks. Then, if it makes its save, it's going to have disadvantage on its next attack roll, and if it fails its save, it won't. I don't know why. Just, they didn't think about it, obviously, right? So just some weird mechanics that have always been there are still there, and some more weird mechanics have been added in. This is kind of a mess. It's still a bad spell, so I don't think it matters. No one's going to take it. But it just really missed opportunity here to make a better spell, and this is just kind of junk. So when I looked at the new player's handbook for the first time, there was a list of things that I went to go look at, and the shield spell was one of them. It was the first spell that I checked because I wanted to see what they would do with it. And guess what? Nothing. They did nothing with it. Shield is exactly the same as it was in 2014. Now, if you are smarter than me, then you haven't picked up a pitchfork yet, because I'm not that smart, and I saw this and I was infuriated. And then, after reading the entire player's handbook, I get it now. Instead of nerfing shield, what they've done is they've created a whole bunch more reaction defenses that can compete with shield. Like, for example, defensive duelist. The feat now, I'll be going over feats in a future video, by the way, and I will show you the feats on the screen. But I'll just tell you right now, defensive duelist now lasts until the start of your next turn. No spell slot. That makes it a whole lot more comparable to shield. And there's a number of other things as well. There's a fighting style, that same thing. The protection fighting style now lasts until start of your next turn, I think. And so a lot of reaction defenses have been improved, which does narrow the gap, because my issue with shield isn't that it's really good. My issue with shield is that nothing really compares to it, so everybody kind of has to go for shield. Even if you're a fighter, you need to find a way to get shield on your character, because it's better than any other reaction defense you could possibly do. That's not as clear cut in the new rules. So once I had the context of the entire rules, I still think shield could have used a small nerf, but I'm not as angry with it after getting the context of the entire rules. So this one does annoy me, and I do think it's a problem, and it's spike growth. So here is the new version of spike growth, same as the old version of spike growth. And I have recently done a video and done another video a couple years ago where I showed how spike growth can be absolutely broken when you combine it with grappling and dragging. The issue is there's a new feat called the Grappler, well, old feat called Grappler, but improved, where you now can drag at your full speed. So the issues with spike growth are only worse now, and they didn't change it at all. They needed to limit. You see, the problem with spike growth is every square you move through, you're doing 2d4 damage, no saving throw, no way to avoid it. And so if you drag somebody through that, it just piles up to massive amounts of damage, and they didn't do anything with it. This is the same spell as it was in 2014. And I do think this spell is now a problem spell, and that's unfortunate. Okay, so here is Summon Aberration in the rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I'm bringing up this not because of changes, okay? I'm actually bringing this one up because Jeremy Crawford talked about a new option here where you could summon a Mind Flayer, and boy, that's cool. And I need to clarify something. I couldn't say it at the time, but I'm going to say it now. Here is the new version of Summon Aberration, and it is the same. Now, I should mention this for all the summoning spells from Tasha's. I thought they might get rid of the costly components, kind of like with Chromatic Orb, and they did not. So those costly components are still there. That is unfortunate. Another thing I thought they might do is they might add hit dice to the creatures. They did not. In fact, Summon Draconic Spirit used to have hit dice in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, and they ported it over here and they took the hit dice away. So they obviously really don't want these creatures to have hit dice. And that normally doesn't matter, but it mattered if you were a Shepherd Druid, and Shepherd Druid is basically obsolete at this point. It just does not work with these new rules. I did do a homebrew version of it very recently that will work. It works just fine. But if you want to use the printed version of Shepherd Druid, I wouldn't. It's just not going to convert. So the hit dice maybe doesn't matter. But here's the thing I think I need to let you know is, so the Mind Flayer option. Here it is. You will note that this doesn't look any bigger, this stat block, than the version in Tasha's. And if you compare it to your version in Tasha's, you will see that it is the same stat block. The only difference is the Star Spawn has been renamed to the Mind Flayer. So it's not a new option. They just reflavored the Star Spawn to be a Mind Flayer, which is fine. Mind Flayers are cool, right? I don't have a problem with it. But I felt like in the video, it seemed like you were getting a fourth option. You're not getting a fourth option. It's the same three options. They just renamed Star Spawn to Mind Flayer. Now, here's the old version of Tasha's Hideous Laughter. And it's a good spell. Doesn't need a buff. Doesn't need a nerf. So why is it on this video? I'll show you. Because here's the new version. And it works the same. So look at the bottom. Using a higher level spell slot, you can target one additional creature for each spell slot level above 1. That is a big buff to Tasha's Hideous Laughter. One of the things I always like doing with a sorcerer is, you could do Aberrant Mind, and then you could get Tasha's Hideous Laughter because it's normally not on the sorcerer spell list. And then you could twin it because twinning Tasha's Hideous Laughter is so good. Well, the upcasting is also going to be so good, like really good, maybe too good. So I am concerned that this upcasting option is going to kind of be a go-to for casters now, because an upcast Tasha's Hideous Laughter that can target 3 people, 4 people is exceptional. So I think they might have gone too far with the buffing on Tasha's Hideous Laughter. That's my initial impression. We'll see. I haven't played this yet. So what is really surprising to me, it's not all that surprising that Wall of Force is on this list today, except for the fact that on my last video where I talked about spells that had been rebalanced, I brought up Force Cage, which had major nerfing to it. Wall of Force is the same as it's always been. No changes, really. And this is really surprising because, like I said, Force Cage got hit hard, and it's kind of the cousin of Wall of Force. It's like the upgrade. You have Wall of Force level 5, and then you get to Force Cage level 7, and now you no longer have concentration. And yeah, no, the Wall of Force just wasn't changed. No costly component added like they did to Force Cage. So I'm not sure why it didn't get a similar treatment to Force Cage, but it didn't. So Wall of Force, still really, really strong spell. Maybe just because it's only a wizard spell. Maybe that's why. But anyway, yeah, same as it always was. So I saved the best or the worst for last, the web spell. The web spell is one of the best, if not the best, second level spells in the game. Definitely a spell I thought they might nerf. In fact, I had in my head some ways that I figured they probably would nerf it, like an automatic saving throw on following turns, for example. But no, web got buffed. All right, so this is the new web spell. Still second level, action 60 feet, same components, concentration up to an hour. That's all the same. You conjure a mass of sticky webbing at a point within range, 20-foot cube. They're difficult terrain, and the area within them is lightly obscured. If the webs aren't anchored between 2 solid masses, you get the 5-foot layer on the floor. And if it's not on the floor or ceiling or anything, it collapses on itself at the start of your next turn. This is all the same. And the first time a creature enters the web on a turn or starts its turn there, it must succeed on a dexterity saving throw or have the restraint condition while in the webs or until it breaks free. This is the buff. So the old version, if you moved a creature into the webs and it was not their turn, they did not have to make a saving throw right away. Now they do. So that's the same as Ever's Black Tentacles. So if you push a creature in, it makes a save. If it makes the save at the start of its turn, it's going to have to make another save. And if it fails that save, it's still restrained. And same thing where if you are restrained by the webs, you can use your action to make a strength athletics check against your spell save DC. I think adding athletics is technically a nerf there, because before it was just a strength check. But nevertheless, I mean, most creatures aren't trained in athletics. And then if it succeeds, it's no longer restrained and flammable, and that all works the same as it did before. But just really odd for me to go into web and see that not only did it not get nerfed at all, that it actually got buffed. That's crazy. So web is really, 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 really good now. And yeah, that kind of shook me. So in my next video, I'm going to be covering more spells. Those are the ones that I just found, changes that I thought were interesting. In some cases, they could be called buffs or nerfs, but mostly it's just things that I thought were notable and that I figured you might want to see. So I'm going to be showing you those, just like with this video, up on the screen so you can read them word for word, spells that have been changed in ways that I thought was worthy of note. And then my final spells video, I'll cover all the new spells. By the way, in my next video, I will also cover conjuration spells, which all got major changes. This should be no surprise to anybody, but I want to show you what the final versions look like. So I will hope you will join me for both those videos and the ones after that. I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.